The Liberty Weekly Podcast, Episode 8.
Since in reality Big Brother is not omnipotent and the party is not infallible, there is a need for an unwearying moment-to-moment flexibility in the treatment of facts. The key word here is black-white. Like so many newspeak words, this word has two mutually contradictory meanings. Applied to an opponent, it means the habit of impudently claiming that black is white, in contradiction of the plain facts. Applied to a party member, it means a loyal willingness to say that black is white when party discipline demands this. But it means also the ability to believe that black is white, and more, to know that black is white, and to forget that one has ever believed the contrary. This demands a continuous alteration of the past, made possible by the system of thought which really embraces all the rest, and which is known in newspeak as doublethink. The alteration of the past is necessary for two reasons, one of which is subsidiary and, so to speak, precautionary. The subsidiary reason is that the party member, like the proletarian, tolerates present-day conditions partly because he has no standards of comparison. He must be cut off from the past, just as he must be cut off from foreign countries, because it is necessary for him to believe that he is better off than his ancestors and that the average level of material comfort is constantly rising. But by far the more important reason for the readjustment of the past is the need to safeguard the infallibility of the party. It is not merely that speeches, statistics, and records of every kind must be constantly brought up to date in order to show that the predictions of the party were in all cases right. It is also that no change of doctrine or in political alignment can ever be admitted, for to change one's mind, or even one's policy, is a confession of weakness. If, for example, Eurasia or Eastasia, whichever it may be, is the enemy today, then that country must always have been the enemy. And if the facts say otherwise, then the facts must be altered.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Liberty Weekly Podcast. I'm your host, Pat McFarland, and joining me, as always, is the co-host, Jerry McCollum.
Thank you, Pat.
All right, so today before we dive in, I want to address our spot on the Tom Woods Show. I talked about it in the last episode because the last one, if I recall correctly, was the first episode since our spot on the Tom Woods Show. But I'm super proud to say that we've had a crap ton of listens and downloads since then. And it's been pretty stable. I think now we're nearing about 800 listens for the month of June. And I think I guess we're halfway through now, but we're super happy with that, and we're really thrilled. And we'd just like, again, to thank everyone that's tuning in. Maybe for the first time this episode, but maybe now you've listened to all the episodes, and we're just really grateful for that. So today, I think this is going to be a Thoughcrime Thursdays episode in honor of Tom Woods giving us praise for that column. So we're going to keep up with that. And today, we're going to talk about V for Vendetta, which is a very popular movie based on a comic book. Was it made by the Wachowski brothers? Sisters now?
I'm not sure. I know the comic book was made by was written by Alan Moore.
Oh, okay. But the movie I know was the Wachowski sisters now because they had a sex change.
Both of them?
Yeah, I think both of them.
Oh, well, anyway.
Maybe correct me if I'm wrong.
This is something I do not know.
Yeah, well, that's an aside.
I guess to start off with something I think is I was just looking up a statistic. So this is from 2013, but Britain has a CCTV camera for every 11 people in the country. And that's from 2013, so I'm pretty sure it's higher than that now.
Are they private?
I don't think so. I think they're public. I'm not sure. It looks like they're public and private.
Oh, okay.
But I know that in general, people talk about Britain being the place, the most surveilled area of the world. And I remember in the comic that it was a point was made about I find it surprising that a lot of dystopic, 1984 and V for Vendetta both take place in England, and it just so happens that England has things like the greatest amount of CCTVs in the Western world, which surprising to me. It's like how exactly that happened. It seems odd to me.
Yeah.
Like, why there?
Well, I was saying before we went on a hot mic that 1984 was a warning, not an instruction manual, and some people have said that before. So I can't take the credit.
But
for that.
For me, I guess it's definitely subtle. I think I know when I became a voluntarist that it kind of was like a month of being like, oh my God, that part is true. That reference in 1984 is true as well.
It's so I read 1984, it was last summer.
I read it a while ago. Actually, I was in middle school. Oh, that's like a while. I can't do the math right now, but quite a long time. And
I didn't like it.
Really?
I thought it was kind of boring.
Oh, I liked it quite a bit. I thought it was kind of chilling, to be honest.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it a lot from what I remember. And I know that so often that there are parts of it that I feel really apply well to the modern day, in just subtle ways. Like one example that I really like is, not that I like, but that I think of often, is the Minute of Hate.
Yeah.
I forgot the name of the person that they hate, but this is kind of funny. This is something that my father, when the war on terror started, that he talked about how he felt like there was like a war on hate towards like Saddam Hussein, and he didn't really like it. And like I think it's true. I think that there very much was like a lot of,
or Osama bin Laden.
Osama bin Laden, and
as well.
And now I honestly see that Minute of Hate happening quite a bit when it comes towards Trump.
Yeah.
I feel like that's something that's distracting a significant amount of people from other issues. And I don't know, I'm particularly sensitive to this because I'm surrounded by a lot of liberals. So, now...
Yeah, being in Twin Cities.
now that Obama isn't around anymore, now everyone's complaining about the executive branch of the government again. And it's really frustrating to me because it's so incredibly hypocritical, where it's like, oh, look, Trump's golfed so much. And I'm like... Obama's golf too. Like, you're just everything you can.
And a funny thing too is like, we want him golfing, so he's not doing harmful things.
Oh yeah,
to the
in
world.
my opinion, it would be better if he did nothing.
Yeah, but I mean, and I've thought of this a lot more recently. That and especially with the books that I've been reading, I just started a book about Afghanistan. I was telling Jerry before we went on the mic, I started this book about Afghanistan and the CIA's involvement in starting the Taliban and how they trained Osama bin Laden and gave him weapons through Pakistan and the Pakistani government, to fight Russia in Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. And he turned on us.
No,
but
it's the turning on us is something that often is kind of glossed over and forgotten and not mentioned, I think, kind of purposely. It, similar to 1984. I'm sure that this has been retread quite a few times.
The rewriting of history.
But it's the rewriting of history. It's like we've always been at war with Oceania.
Yeah.
And that's I think that's like a really good example where it's not, there's not an actual erasure of documents, but instead it's sort of a erasure of like public consciousness of something.
Yeah,
like that.
and they've always controlled the narrative too.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily need to erase it because or the whole thing that 9/11, before 9/11, the Patriot Act was already written before, and the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan was already planned before 9/11 happened.
Yeah, just waiting for a good opportunity.
Yeah, there's no way they mobilized the entire military for a major operation in a month or two. But that's an aside too. But I wanted to qualify my dislike of 1984 when I read it because obviously it's a very iconic novel, and you realize its importance over a period of time.
Oh yeah.
And I think I want to say too, because I read 1984 after I had read a large number of other novels, dystopian novels, and obviously 1984 was seminal. It's very influential. And so I found the plot to be derivative.
Yeah.
Even though, it was one of the first, because, man is in oppressive society. Man meets woman, falls in love, and realizes, but I guess at the end he realizes that he loves Big Brother.
Yeah.
Or
well, in the end, his spirit is conquered.
yeah. Am I misremembering the novel? Because he falls in love.
He
doesn't
does, yeah, he does. But then they get caught, and then he goes into, he basically gets tortured. And for how I interpreted that is at the end his spirit fails, and it's sort of at the end of the book, it's now from the perspective of he's finally come back to Big Brother, and it's good. And so it sort of turns the entire story at the very end of it. This is how I felt when I was reading it. As the reader, I was, oh no, all this terrible thing has happened. Now, he's lost his fight. But from his perspective, he has now, at that moment, he has now come back to what he's lost. He's come back to being part of society and fitting within the mold. And so it's kind of like that return to the norm is something that he, in the end, is perceived as good. And it's really tragic as a reader, I find, because you're like, oh no, we lost, and he doesn't get it. That makes sense. And that's something that it actually took me a while to figure that out. When I read it when I was very young, I was confused. But then later in time, I was like, oh wait, of course, I definitely read it when maybe you could say I was precocious, but maybe you could also say I was just reading things above my reading level. But that's from what I recall. It's he falls in love with someone, and in that process, is pulled more towards enlightenment or freedom, you could say, and then is captured and brought back.
But the thing that struck me entirely was that in the society, even Goldstein, whom you're not supposed to follow, is part of Big Brother. And in that whole narrative that is anti-Big Brother is co-opted by Big Brother. And it's kind of, the left-hand path. People who are free thinkers, we're going to try and grab them up and divert them down this side street, which...
It reminds me of an idea that James Corbett has talked about, where he talks about there being kind of two levels of propaganda.
Yeah.
And there's one level of propaganda that's aimed at the mainstream, and then there's a second level that is kind of aimed at everyone who has beginning to understand what's going on. And so but how he describes it is sort of, you're someone who now knows what Bilderberg is and cares. Now before there is nothing that is nefarious. And now in the first, you could say the first surface level of propaganda that Corbett talks about is that there's nothing nefarious and that everything's okay. And the government as a whole is not conspiring against you, And then the second level of propaganda is that there is an organized, sophisticated group that is conspiring against you, and they are extreme, they are all powerful and they're unified, a force to be reckoned with. And then the reality is that it's more likely that there are a lot of people who are interested in their own means, who work with each other and compete against each other. And it's not a monolith, just the Illuminati or something like that.
Yeah.
Instead, it's many different actors and groups of interests that are working with each other and sometimes against each other.
Yeah, the rings within rings, to quote G. Edward Griffin. And Corbett uses that analogy too. And I think it's pretty apt. But what you see a lot of times too, and I was telling Jerry again off the mic, because we've been playing D&D all night with our group, and so this is Jerry's natural hours because he works nights, and I've been up since 7 a.m. and it's currently almost 1 a.m. So, but I met with my grandma for lunch today because we meet every week for lunch, and my grandfather was big into this kind of stuff, and I would describe him as a Barry Goldwater conservative, I think, back in the day, because he's been dead for a long time. But he was all against the Fed, and I think my grandma knew about this and probably listened to him rant the same way that my wife listens to me rant, because she's a good person to talk at, and I think she finds it interesting. And we were talking about how when you're talking about conspiracy theories, in quotes, conspiracy, how usually when people hear someone talk about how 9/11 was a false flag, or something about chemtrails, or about, all the different buzz topics,
Yeah.
is that there are straw men that are built into it. Like,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
when you say, 9/11 was a false flag, people think jet fuel can't melt steel beams.
Yeah.
Or when someone mentions chemtrails, instantly they think of this conspiracy on commercial airliners, that every single commercial airliner has a secret compartment with chemtrails in
Yeah.
it, or when that's not the case. That's not the proposition.
That people who are, I guess you could say, more who've looked into a situation more will propose.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with the argument about chemtrails.
Yeah, I'm not as much either. Actually, that was an example.
Okay,
but
yeah.
but I do know, and Corbett has talked about this, that they do spray things in the air, and it might not be through airliners or commercial airliners, but it is on public record that they have been putting things in the air like that, in the atmosphere, to try and influence things.
To do something.
Yeah, I wouldn't die on a hill for it, but I specifically remember him talking about it somewhere. And this isn't a show to talk about conspiracy theories. That's not what I want planned for this podcast. But we do have interest in the subject, and there's certain things that we look into, I suppose you could say. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. I think so. Similarly, there actually was a paper put out, in a political philosophy paper that was put out by Harvard Law. I don't know if they're graduates or students. And the paper was about how to deal with conspiracy theories and what a government should do when people have, are in a situation where there's a lot of people who are talking about conspiracy theories, and none of the suggested ways of dealing with it involved openness or telling the truth or anything like that, which is kind of funny because that would be a very easy way to get rid of a conspiracy, would be to release all the information they could, have a lot more transparency. But instead, what this paper recommends is either limiting the ability for these ideas to be disseminated, through taxation, or by banning that kind of speech, or by engaging in counter narratives, in effect trying to weaken the particular conspiracy movement by infiltrating it and building a straw man, basically. And we'll link that in the show notes, but it's called Conspiracy Theories, Causes and Cures. And when I heard about that, it kind of blew my mind. It was like, this is like a paper. It is a paper written by someone. It's not something that guarantees these are what people do, but these are Harvard Law professors, who are into political philosophy, and this is what they're suggesting, which is very bizarre.
Yeah, there's a lot of very influential, I think. This is pulled off the top of my head, but I think 80 to 90% of our Supreme Court justices have either been from Harvard or Yale law. And
I believe it.
Yeah, and so, but there's so much to talk about with 1984.
Oh yeah, we can just scratch the surface.
Yeah.
For example, in the slogan that you hear often is, war is peace,
ignorance is strength. Yeah.
War, yeah, and the freedom is slavery. And in those situations where we're in the land of the free, apparently that's what our country calls itself, yet we would say that we're relatively more free, but still very far from being free. And I particularly like war is peace. We're going, the United States takes the duty of peacekeeper within the world, but really what they end up doing is instigating conflicts and destabilizing regimes throughout the world and creating war in the name of peace.
Yeah, and the statism is very strong. Once you see it around here in the cities too, but I think the quote-unquote diversity here in the cities kind of masks it, the patriotism, the statism. I'm talking specifically about, the summer is very fraught with patriotism.
Yeah.
And if you go out in the country, you see it a lot. And I'm referring... I don't know. I've been spending time outside the cities a lot this summer, and you really can see it. People are very toting of their freedom symbology and their state worship. It
always really surprises me how mad some people get about an American flag being disrespected or something of the sort. It always really surprises me. It's a symbol. It doesn't mean what does that mean?
Yeah, to them, and I don't want to straw man them, I guess. We say that a lot, but having seen it firsthand, because either family members or people like that, they always harken back to like, oh, D-Day, or all of the men who died so you could be free. And if you destroy the flag, you're pissing on their graves because, they died for you and for your freedom.
So they kind of, something that I do see, and this, this isn't something that everyone does necessarily, but when you criticize the state or the nature of the country or something like that, they sometimes will then detract to like, oh, well, you're insulting people who have made sacrifices for us, allegedly. And it's that's not what I'm talking about.
Or when you say, oh, World War II was not necessary, or World War I was not necessary. U.S. involvement in it. Or even the whole conflict entirely. I was talking with my grandma about this today. It's funny. Well, we could get into the World War I stuff, and I'll link to a Tom Woods Show episode specifically on that. And because World War I is so intertwined with World War II, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
But specifically, the other week, there was what's called Grand Old Days in St. Paul, and it's a gigantic block party where about 200,000 people come, and there's booze and crap, and the Marine Corps was there with their recruitment thing, and they were doing the thing where they were doing pull-up bars and trying to recruit young men to go kill brown people and die for oil companies. And I thought it was very fitting as I was walking past. They were playing that Drowning Pool song, Let the Bodies Hit the Floor. And I was like, are you freaking kidding me?
They don't, there's a very different kind of irony for us.
And I said something about the hundreds of thousands of, civilians that have died in the Middle East because of our meddling. And the Madeleine Albright quote about in Iraq how 30,000 children have died by our figures. And she says, well, to us, we believe it was worth it. The price was worth it. And there was a couple in front of me that really did not like what I had to say about it. It wasn't overt, their displeasure, but my wife flipped them off.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
She gets feisty in crowds.
Damn.
Yeah, she gets feisty in crowds.
This is something I hear, but apparently the home that I grew up in gets pretty regular calls from, I think it was Navy recruiters, and which is just really funny to me. And I unfortunately have never gotten the chance to get one of those calls, because it would be very fun, I would think, to give one of those recruiters an earful, and it wouldn't change their mind or anything like that, but it would be cathartic, I guess you might say.
Yeah, speaking of cognitive dissonance, Corbett does such a good, ignorance is strength kind of, his quick videos about, 9/11, a conspiracy theory, because ignorance is strength. It's so sassy.
Yeah, his very highly edited stuff can be pretty fun.
Yeah.
They feel very satisfying.
Yeah. I think that's his attempt at humor, though. It's supposed, it is humorous, but it's a different kind of humor. His humor is it's very dry. It's very dry and very cerebral. Maybe not cerebral, but you have to know things about things for it to be
you have
funny.
To be in the know.
Yeah, in the know.
Well, the humor, it's sort of like, that this is a joke is being made, and because it's a joke being made, it implies things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, or with the 9/11 video, you have to know about the dancing Israelis, or you have to know about Osama bin Laden being on dialysis and near death during the events.
Yeah.
And it's obviously a false flag to anyone who looks with any kind of degree of, closeness as 9/11, you realize. And like I said, I didn't want to make this about conspiracy, but I, if you take any close look at 9/11, you realize it for what it is.
The official, there's more things going on than the official report.
Yes, at the very least. And I guess it's hard to say this happened for certain, but one thing I really do think is controlled demolition. I think even if you look at the tapes, it becomes obvious that it was a controlled demolition. But I'll put a link for those interested. If if you want to break your cognitive dissonance. But
there's a meme that I think is great. It's just FBI foils FBI terror plot.
Yeah. Nice try, FBI. And if you're listening, FBI, please, I'm not planning any events. That reminds me
if you're listening, FBI, please give us more downloads.
Yes, please. Yeah, please. It reminds me of that episode of South Park where Cartman is like, "Oh, the NSA is listening to me, you guys," and he goes to the NSA, and it like he's not important enough to be listened to by the NSA. Yeah, or the irony of everyone, being a loudmouth about what they're doing in their lives on social media, and then they don't want the NSA to listen to but they can broadcast it to everyone who will listen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Here I say we're not going to talk about conspiracy theories on this podcast, but this whole episode has been centered around it.
Many other episodes, it's hard.
Yeah, yeah, and especially with the 1984, because the themes in the novel, they're so pertinent to the conspiracy theory phenomenon.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so this book that I'm reading was talking about how during September 11th, like September 10th, Osama bin Laden was in an American military hospital somewhere in the Middle East, and he was spotted there by several people,
mm-hmm.
and that they had like a special, the way they phrased it was that, he had a special guest. And I'm going to include the name of this book in the show notes page. But it was interesting because it was documented in mainstream sources that he was at this American military hospital.
Mm-hmm.
At least there were two instances. Like at least he was there a month or two, like in July of 2011 or 2001. So he was there receiving dialysis treatments. And a month later, during the actual events, he was, I think, at a different American military hospital receiving dialysis treatments, and was visited by several high-level staff in the American military, mm-hmm. and stuff. So, they were mainstream sources too. I'd have to get into that, but you can read the book for yourself. It's real good. Like I said, the author doesn't know. I was telling Jerry about it off the mic, but the author doesn't know anything about economics in terms of, the free market, mm-hmm. and stuff. But there's a lot of good stuff about like the Golden Crescent drug trade, and just the immense amount of drugs that are traded to fund the CIA's operation and stuff, like thousands of metric tons of heroin. And this kind of goes too into what the whole soldiers guarding poppy fields, mm-hmm. thing, is that a lot of what soldiers do is, in Afghanistan especially, they go through like the Korengal Valley, which is one of the hottest areas in Afghanistan. And a lot of what they're doing is protecting poppy farms and repaying farmers and protecting farmers. And
mm-hmm.
but some of the poppy gets lost, I suppose. And so they...
Lost, in quotes?
Yeah. And so they repay the poppy farmers for their crops and stuff like that, because, that's what we're doing over there. It has to do with oil too, but mostly heroin and oil,
mm-hmm.
drugs.
Drugs.
My drugs.
Don't do heroin, kids.
Yeah, don't do it.
Unless you want to. I won't say that you can't.
Unless you have a messed up home life, then don't do heroin.
Don't do heroin unless you're a rock star, then it's okay.
Yeah. We should be careful what we say now.
Yeah, we should.
Because we have an audience. Thank you, audience. I hope you really enjoy the Liberty Weekly podcast. We're going to close up this episode because I'm going to be out of town next weekend, actually. Not this coming weekend, but the next one. And so we're going to try and get some episodes in the pipe for you.
Mm-hmm.
Get it in the pipe? Okay. It's been a late night. So just, the normal housekeeping stuff as we're signing out here. First off, what is the status with the giveaway? Well, the status with the giveaway is that we have... So throughout the launch of the podcast, we've been advertising this Steam/Amazon gift card giveaway, right? Mm-hmm. And only 5 people... I'm going to be honest with y'all. I'm going to be honest with everyone. Only about 5 people have signed up for the email list since we've launched the podcast, which is very disproportionate to the number of listens that we've had, which have been almost near 1,000 now.
Yeah.
But I mean, to everyone listening, there are only 5 people signed up to win a $20 gift card. So if there's a large chance that you would win, I mean, 20% as it stands now. But if you want a free, like, non-detriment to you chance to win a $20 gift card, sign up for that email list. Like, come on, people. And, I mean, you get a free ebook out of it. And I actually want to do an episode about the ebook and about, maybe that'll be a solo one, if that's all right.
Oh, yeah. So
I'll do that as well. But at the risk of sounding desperate, no, that's not the case. Like, I just don't want to waste $20. And another thing, too, is, you know, also on Twitter and Facebook, we haven't had too many follows since the beginning of the podcast. There's a lot of bonus content that you could come into contact with, you know, by following us on social media. As well, plug that email list, but also we haven't had any reviews on iTunes yet. So I would implore or exhort the audience, please get on Stitcher, get on iTunes, get on Google Play Music, give us a review. We'd really appreciate it. And if you leave us, you know, if we see it, we will give you a shout out on the show for lots of people to listen and hear. And you'll be famous because it will be preserved. And
preserved in history.
And 5 years from now, when we are standing at the peak of our media empire and looking down into the annals of history, you will forever be preserved. Yes. Your name in audio files will be preserved. Okay. I've gotten a bit too grandiose for our britches here. It is 1:41 in the morning. So we are going to sign off on this very late, very awesome episode. And we'll see you next time. Good night.